Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Florida Hockey Bros podcast. I'm your host, David. I have my brother, Daryl, here, and today we're going to talk about a couple of things. On them, we're going to start with some Zito Talk. Um, Basically, we're going to go over some of the moves that we've liked, as well as some prospect talk. And beyond that, we're going to jump into the NHL Takes and talk about the Maple Leafs for a little bit at the end of the show. So stay tuned for that. But let's get right into it. Daryl, I know you're very high on Zito, and he's been here now a couple of years, and he's made drastic changes to the franchise that I think we both like. So if you can tell us a little bit what moves, trades, signings that Zito has done that you particularly like or dislike, just kind of give us an overview of what you think he's done well since he got here.
Yeah, I think I wanted to talk about this topic because I feel like I think people have noticed, and not just in Florida but around the league, like some of the really good work that Cito has done. There's been a little bit of criticism last year too, which I'll talk a little bit about with some of the picks he's given away. But if you have the context of what the Panthers were before he came in, I think 2020, about 3 years ago, this was a team that has some young talent in it, with Huberdeau and Barkov, Ekblad, that cord. And then they had, given out the Bobrovsky contract already. So he was coming to a team that has some young talent, but some bad contracts. Keith Yandel, and the buyout. Has been dealing with issues with the cap since taking over. Hasn't had a full control of the cap in Florida. So he had to resort to finding guys on the periphery around the young core to try to build up the team. And I think when you start to really dig into all the players that he's brought in, all the moves he's made, specifically through signings or claiming guys of waivers and then how they've performed over the last 3 years, and I'll talk a little bit about those guys. I think it's pretty impressive, just the sheer amount of players that he's found to be able to create a contender, what's become a contender now, having been to the finals this past season. So when you look at some of the high picks, the guys like Sam Reinhart, Sam Bennett, coming from Calgary, Reinhart from Buffalo, even Brandon Montour, who had a breakout season this year. These were guys that in their teams either were not breaking out yet to the full potential or weren't getting opportunities, and he brought them in and became key parts of our run this year, but also have been playing really well since coming to the Panthers. You got a guy like Carter Verhaeghe, who's become a 40-goal scorer, has a great shot, who looks like a pure scorer, and has developed into a more complete player who was kind of in the periphery playing in Tampa, and I think he was initially in Toronto. And so I think you look at a guy like Lustrainen, who came from Carolina in that system. You look at a guy like Mason Marchment, who left to Dallas but had a breakout year last season on that Lundell and Reinhardt line. And then a guy like Josh Mahura, we picked off waivers, and became a really solid bottom third pair player with Gudas the whole season, Raka Gudas, and became a reliable guy. He played through the playoffs for us and was signed for another year. And there's a lot other examples, a lot more other examples, and maybe you can think of some, David. But for me, when you look at those guys where they was claiming off waivers, I forgot Forsling, like Gustav Forsling, who became a top pair defenseman with Ed Black this season, and it's a really reliable guy in the playoffs the last two seasons. His level of skill, his skating, he's a guy who just got picked off waivers, I believe. So again, you start to look at that list in a very short amount of time, having brought all those guys in, and then most of those guys having career years, either a couple years ago or this past season. I think it's pretty impressive to have a GM come in and be able to know guys that are going to gel, that are going to create a really good, healthy locker room, which was the case this year with Maurice coming in, and to be able to elevate their play, to be able to adapt to a different style, to a more physical style than they played, the season that they won the President's Trophy. So to me, when you break that down for a GM, that's a skill that can be replicated. That's a skill that I think, obviously, he's working with a team of guys, but people. But to me, to have a guy who could do that, who can find talent in the margins, who has a good eye for who might have potential, and not just in terms of scoring or ability to play fast, but two-way play. I mean, some of these guys that I mentioned are really good on the defensive end. Some of them are still very young, in their 20s. So you can keep some of them around. Lustrani just got a new deal for 3 years. So anyway, when you break down these kinds of players that are they're not hot names, they're not necessarily names that a lot of people know, or names that people knew, like Bennett and Reinhardt, having been high picks, but never really developed in their teams to their full potential. I don't know. It's just impressive to me that in a very short amount of time he was able to do that. And to be honest, that's something the Panthers have not been able to do in the past, and it's why they missed the playoffs for so many years in a row, and they never built a contender, despite having some very good young talent at the core. So anyway, to me, that's one area where Zito has really excelled, and that makes me excited for what's coming next year with, some of these other guys he's brought in more recently, like Lawrence and the Evan Rodriguez signing. Like, these guys might be a good fit. You can start to trust Zito more with those moves. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think you sort of have to take last year out of this topic, because I think last year he was kind of forced to just build around with whatever was available and affordable because of the cap. But what has impressed me about Zito since he's come in is what you just mentioned about finding guys with potential, which is so hard to do because you sort of have to see into the future, right? You have to see what this person or this player can become and how they can contribute to your team. So I have a question about everything you just said. Do you think that Zito, or I guess this is more of a general GM question around the league, do you think that they come into a franchise with a game plan and then just build accordingly? Or do you think that there's some guys out there just trying to find the best talent? Maybe just plug in a guy in your second line. Because the way I see it, I feel like Zito and ownership, they have a clear vision, not just to win the cup, but how we're going to get there, which goes into the whole Maurice hiring and the whole fiasco from two seasons ago. But I guess my question to you is that, do you think that Zito, are these moves calculated to build, specific team or type of team that can shine and get to the cup? Or do you think, he's just finding these guys here and there and just trying to put something together?
Yeah, I think it depends. I think there are GMs who are more strategic than others. You can kind of tell the way they go about year to year, and the GMs who really struggle to build something sustainable or to develop a team in terms of who they're bringing in. I think with Zito, it's pretty clear that he not just has a vision for the type of player that he thinks could fit in the system, but also that he's willing to learn and adapt. And I'll talk a little bit about that later too. But he's overseen now in just 3 years a transformation and a change with our coaching, on the Panthers, and a style of play. And for a GM to do that and to admit that, okay, what I was doing last year or what we were doing last year didn't fully work and we need to do better, I think that speaks to that strategy. You also mentioned this past year. I actually think that even though he was very cap-strapped this past year and he got criticism for bringing the Stalls, who everybody hated early on with the Panthers, if you really break down how that played out, Nick Cousins, who was a signing, it's not only still with the team for this new season, but he played in the second line in the playoffs and had success with Bennett and Tkachuk. And so that was a signing he brought in, and that was a guy that, because of how he works and some of his skills, he could step up to that the top six and contribute, and of course he's not a top end talent, but he could do that. And then Mark Stahl, Paul Maurice said it, he's one of the reasons why Montour had a breakout year, because they paired him up and Montour could go and play on offense and be free, and he could rely on Mark Stahl being sort of solid and being there. When you look at Mark Stahl's numbers, they're not as bad as people think in terms of his defensive play, and he looked pretty good in the playoffs. He was physical, he cleared the net, and he also provided leadership. Same with Eric Stahl. It took him a while to get going, but then he provided some numbers in the middle of the season when we needed it. He provided some leadership. and some good penalty killing at key times. So even then, like, you could see that this was an in-between year. And I think Zito knew that, bringing a new coach in. And his strategy was, I'm going to bring some of these guys that have some experience, that are going to work hard, are going to be examples to some of the younger core, and we're going to try to push them. And maybe I don't think they expected to get to the finals at all. They kept saying this is going to be a hard year, and it was for a big part of the year. But again, it speaks to strategy. He didn't want to keep doing the flashy stuff. He didn't want to keep getting just a ton of points in the regular season, or scoring a ton of goals, or that be the priority. He wanted to build long-term contender, more physical team, different style, and he brought in guys in the in-between with what little money he had to help usher and help lead. And now we have, I think, a deeper team going to this year and probably forward, and better cap situation starting next year. And then he can really build the kind of team fully that he wants, now going into a fourth or fifth year. But anyway, I just think he just knows what he's doing, to my mind, and he's made the most of what he's had to work with, which is another thing that you couldn't ask anything more of a GM. And I don't think this past year was just an anomaly or a one-off. I think we're going to contend for a little while.
Yeah, I agree. And to your point about the Stoll brothers, and I know it's controversial or whatever, for reasons outside of hockey, but to know that you're gonna have a year with difficulties, which, by the way, got more difficult once Knight went into the players assistance program, because they were counting on him. So it was even more difficult than I think Zito expected. I think to go into the year knowing that it was a bit of a transition year, hiring the coach that you want to carry, your whatever your plan is, all those things that he did last year, I think, he knew that it was going to be a struggle. I think most fans didn't really understand that going into the season, and to see such a drop off to start the season was kind of shocking. But yeah, like even I guess if you take into account last season and the players that he brought in, they somehow just made it work. Whether it was Maurice, and a lot of it is on Maurice and the coaching staff, but I think there's just something about Zito that's special. He has a good team of scouts, and he also just has an eye for it. He just has a feel for who to get, and get the most out of these guys, because most of these guys have had career years here. So yeah, we can transition a little bit into prospect talk. Is there anything else you want to talk about Zito, as far as any specific signings, anything that you can see coming, maybe, that you can talk about?
No, I think that'd probably be a topic for a different episode, in terms of looking at like what situation he's in, the cap, what he might do going forward. I think for now, I'm excited about the core he's put together, the team we're going to have this year. I think the playoff experience over the last couple of seasons is really going to hopefully start to pay off in the regular season more and more. You're going to see guys be more confident. Yeah, you can see guys like Lundell and Luosterainen be better. Mahura might take a step and really solidify that sixth spot. And so it'll be interesting to see. And we'll do more of a season preview for the new signings and what's coming this year. Or he's brought in a bunch of new players. Again, around the edges, for the most part, no huge, big, splashy signings. So we can talk about that. But I think for now, that the guys he's had over the last 3 years, to me, and the way they flourish is just pretty cool to see. And I don't think the Panthers have really had that in the last 20 years plus. And in terms of prospects, I think the reason I wanted to talk a little bit about that too is that, prospect talk can be kind of annoying and more in the weeds. And, unless you're following that, you're not really sure. And I'm not a prospects expert by any means, or a hockey expert by any means. I'm just a fan, but I like to sort of read between the lines and sort of trying to dig a little bit more and see what's coming. And I think when you look at what Zito has done, a criticism he got over the last couple of years was like trending away some of the first round picks. Ben Sherratt, everybody brings that example. I believe he traded away a first round pick for the Tkachuk trade, as well, in addition to the players. And so I think, he knows at least he committed to going all in when he felt he had the team possibly to go the way. And I think you also want that from your GM. And I think he built the deepest playoff team a couple of years ago when we won the President's Trophy. I think he did Giroux in, he brought Sherratt, and it ended up not working out for other reasons, which I'll maybe also talk about in a different episode. But I don't fault him for trying, and I think he maybe paid on the high end, and I think that was an off season where some people were paying on the high end. We saw that happen this past off season too with Tampa and other teams that also, to my mind, kind of overpaid for certain role guys. But at the end of the day, he did that and got criticized. But when you look at what he's done with the prospects, Lundell's, I think, it's the first year when he joined in, and maybe a lot of that credit goes to the staff that was already in place and to some of the scouts. But Lundell coming in, and he looks like he could turn out to be, a legit, 1C, 2C player, two-way player, super young, super smart, and took a step this past playoffs. He might have a breakout season now coming up. Then you look at Maggie Samoskevich, who I think a lot of people are high on, having looked at him not just in college this past year, but then also in the camp with the kids and seeing his development and seeing how he stands out in terms of speed, his shot, his ability to make plays, his vision, his physicality. Even though he's not necessarily a big guy, he's not afraid to get into it. Anyway, I've seen in a lot of different places outside of Florida too that a lot of people are high on his potential, and he's looking more and more like a top 6 winger who can score. And so that's another late first round pick that might turn out to be a really good, solid scorer for us long term. And then you look at other, there's a few other names, but guys that got picked in a lot of rounds, like Mike Bannon, who became an elite college player, champ, most valuable player in the college tournament for Denver. You look at Jack Devine, who when he was younger was projected to be sort of a very high pick, then, had some stuff happen and didn't develop as quickly as people expected and dropped. And we ended up drafting him on the 7th round. Now, when you read about him, if you go and read about his prospect sort of projections and, where we expect him to go in college now, he people talk to him about being a gem, or being a hidden gem or being like a steal. And then finally also Grayson Saushin, the 2nd round pick this year. He was projected to be a first rounder by a lot of different people. He has a lot of high-end skill. He's feisty. And he might be a steal, in the 2nd round. He might turn out to be a first-round talent. So even though he's traded away some of the picks, and again, there's a ton of other examples. I mean, I wrote down even on the defensive end, guys like Evan Naus, Casper Pudio, guys like Ludwig Jansen, who are playing in Europe, who had great World Juniors last year and this year. Like Casper Pudio was voted the best defenseman of the World Juniors, I think, last year. Jansen led the defensemen in scoring in the juniors this year. And then on the forward end, Justin Surdev, who's a 3rd round pick, who's developing in the AHL and looks to be maybe a good middle 6 forward in the future. And again, a bunch of other guys, Brian McAllister, who he signed coming off college, a great season in college after going undrafted, and it's looking like he might be a really good player. So the prospect pool for the Panthers, to my mind, when I compare it to teams that have competed recently, have traded away picks, it looks to me a lot deeper than people think. And the fact that a lot of these guys are still on track to develop and have shown improvement and growth. And there's a little bit of top end talent. There's a little bit of middle talent. There's a good mix. There are guys that are more physical. Some guys I didn't mention, Josh Davis, Marek Alsher. Like, these are guys who play more of a physical style that actually might break the team in a couple of years because of their style. I think there's enough there, and all you really need, and you tell me this all the time, Dave, is like you just need like 1 or 2 of these guys to really work out every year, to continue to infuse the team with depth and with, maybe 1 or 2 of these guys becomes more of a star player. But I think he's also on the team of scouts that have done a great job making sure that we're not lacking so much on the prospect end. We may not have a top 5 pick because we're making the playoffs and we're not going to get those kinds of picks, but what he's doing in the late first round and then even in latter rounds, he just, and the team of scouts just always seem to find these guys that are like highly rated, but then there's a reason why they dropped, and they're taking a chance on those guys. They're doing their job. They're really, and then you see them in camp and you're like, there's talent there. There's upside there. So anyway, I could nerd out all the time. I mean, I could break down numbers in the AHL and how McAllister looked, how, Mackey looked last year in the AHL, a few games they played. But, these guys could turn out to be legit NHLers in not, maybe in 1, 2, 3 years. So given the depth we currently have and some of the youth that we still have on the team, with most guys being in their 20s, and then these younger guys maybe coming in, again, another example of, this is what Zito's doing with limited resources, limited amount of picks. So I don't know, it makes me trust him more. It makes me feel less nervous about giving away a first rounder because he might find one later on in the draft.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to prospects, there's different ways, I guess, you can go about it. Obviously, the Panthers drafted Huberdeau and Barkov, and Tkachuk, I believe, and Bukestad. I'm pretty sure those guys were drafted by the Panthers. And that was kind of a rebuild, right? That was when the team was starting to get put together, and there was actually a plan in place, which wasn't always the case before, or at least it didn't feel like it as a fan when you were watching the team. And out of all the guys that you've mentioned, from what I know that Mackey, he can be the real deal, and he can be a top 6 forward. I hope, we get to see him a little bit this year. I have a feeling if there's an injury of any sort or anything happens, whether it's a slow start, whatever it is, I think we might see him come in and plug him in there somewhere on the lineup. All right, let's move on to the next topic. Staying on the Zito talk, we're going to talk about the Tkachuk trade. All right, I'll let you have the floor on this one.
Yeah, and the Tkachuk trade has been covered, so I'm not, I guess the angle that I'm coming at it's not so much about Tkachuk coming in. We saw what he did this past year, back-to-back 100-point seasons, leading the Panthers to the playoffs. He led us in points. He was a legit scorer, a ton of overtime goals. Obviously, that no matter how Huberdeau and Weegar do in Calgary or anywhere else, even if they improve, and they probably will, from what they did this year, we got what we needed out of that trade. We got our guy for a long time at a reasonable price, with the cap going up going forward. So I'm not going to focus on that. I want to focus a little bit more on the idea that Zito, having just kind of come in as a GM, was not afraid to trade away the franchise player. Barkov, you could also say it's the other guy, but Huberdeau, I think, was a little bit older and been around a little bit longer. And I think he with all the points he scored and all of that, and he was a fan favorite. He had just his skill level, his passing. A lot of fans loved him. And so to trade away that guy after having won the President's Trophy and at least got into a second round of the playoffs, which is deeper than we've gotten in a long time. And then Weegar, who's a top pairing defenseman and a first round pick and all that, to be willing to give those guys away after what, to my mind, was a very disappointing playoff run. And I think what was disappointing was not just getting swept by the Lightning and us being less competitive, I guess, in a way than we had been even the year before, where we took the Lightning to 6. To me, the thing was the way they looked against the Capitals. Like, Huberdeau looked like a deer on headlights. Like, he did not know, like, he was getting hit, he was getting rushed, which is the way that the playoffs are. He just didn't seem ready for that. And his numbers disappeared. His play disappeared. He didn't contribute to the games as much, didn't impact the games as much. Weegar the same. Weegar was turning over the puck all over the place, giving away goals. And there was not a lot of accountability, honestly, from a lot of these guys in the media, from what I saw. Obviously, Florida and the media is not the same as in Canada or other markets. But what I saw in the interviews and what I heard from them after and during that series and after that series with the Lightning just didn't seem like they took it seriously enough. I honestly, compared to other players and other winners, like, it just felt like they were falling short. And Huberdeau's been around for a while. He was not a kid anymore. And so I think Zito, probably noticed all of that. It wasn't just the play. It wasn't just the fact that they needed an extension. I think all of that contributed. But I think he noticed, like, these guys are not going to make us win. They're not going to lead us to the promised land. They don't have that level of leadership. I know that sounds pretty harsh. I think Huberdeau is a fantastic player. He could be a complementary player. I think a lot of players in the league are complementary players. To my mind, he just never truly became that kind of leader that maybe Tkachuk is, or even Barkov started to become more this year, or even Montour, or some of these guys who you can tell are more naturally meant to lead. And so it takes a lot of guts to be able to trade that away, knowing that you're going to piss off a lot of people in the fan base, that people are going to say that you lost the trade, which people said when the trade happened. I think people have changed their minds since, but it takes a lot to do that. And the same with Andrew Brunette, who was a coach and took over Quenneville after everything that happened with Joe Quenneville. he kind of kept the style. He kind of kept the same, we scored a ton of goals, made a ton of comebacks, and then looked out of sorts in the playoffs. Looked like we couldn't really compete. I mean, I think our sheer depth and talent got us over the hump with the Capitals, who were not as deep, and we saw this year that they kept dropping. But yeah, we didn't look like a serious contender at all. And so I give him a lot of credit for doing that, man, for just going ahead and trading away a franchise player, a top guy in Uyghur, and moving on from Brunette and letting him go, and changing the style completely. I think that, to me, that's vision. I know it's risky, and it could, if it goes bad, you could have a different take, but it takes vision to be able to do that. So that's where I'm at with that.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had to step out for a second. Yeah, as far as the Tkachuk trade, obviously you touched on what we were missing the previous season, that series against Tampa, but not just Tampa. You mentioned against the Capitals as well. It was kind of obvious that something was lacking, right? Our offense was fine, you could say, but there was something missing from the team. There was no character. There was no real leadership, I think. So I think Zito read that pretty well. And I think it's normal for fans to look at a trade and just judge it based on what just happened. So to trade it, away Huberdeau and Uyghur, two of your best players, for a younger guy, obviously Tkachuk, great player at the time of the trade, but I think it's normal for fans to kind of, be unsure about that and how that's going to work out with the team. But obviously, and it's not about winning the trade or not winning the trade for me. It's about how he fits, and I think it's obvious with Zito that it's a puzzle to him. He's just putting all the pieces together, whether it's getting a superstar or just a guy like Evan Rodriguez, right? Just to fit in, I just think he's extremely smart, and he just has a vision. He has a feel for what the team needs, and what to look for. But yeah, the Tkachuk trade, I think, it's not about who won it. Obviously Panthers did, but it's not about that. It's about how to improve the team. And I do think that he took a big chance on that, because if Tkachuk ends up having kind of a lackluster season or doesn't pan out, then obviously he's going to get criticized. But I think it was the right move. I think we all know by now that it was the right move.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add that, I guess what I was trying to say is that sometimes the vision for a GM comes not just from the people that they bring in, but the people that they're willing to move on from and trade and move away. That is hard to do. That is often very, very hard to do, because it impacts your bottom line. Like you said, it's a fan favorite. It's a guy that brings people to the rink to see them. They just had a great regular season, and a lot of fans were not happy. I think a lot of fans were critical, especially when the season started slowly and the Panthers didn't have a great start. I think there was a lot of criticism, not so much about Tkachuk or whatever, but criticism of Maurice and criticism of having moved on from Huberdeau, and maybe that wasn't the best idea. Obviously, then we saw the kind of season Huberdeau had, unfortunately, in Calgary, and then it was harder to make that argument. But anyway, I think that, again, that's, to me, and the last thing I'll say is that Zito also in interviews said in the playoffs, one of the advantages of having gone deep in the playoffs is that we got to hear from Zito more than usual. And one of the things he said is that he himself with Maurice, they have a close relationship. It seems like he's looking to learn. Like, he knows he's still kind of a new GM, it's his first full GM job at this level, at the NHL level. And he knows he's learning. He said that, he's learning. He's looking at the moves he made last year, at the draft picks he traded. You could tell he's being a little bit more maybe conservative and less aggressive with some of the stuff he keeps up. But I still give him credit, for having that vision. Because again, it isn't just one thing. If you don't, he did this one thing and it worked out, but it's like he's done a lot of things that have worked out. And maybe there are one or two or three you can point to, like any GM that maybe didn't pan out as well as you could have hoped. But there isn't nothing egregious that I can see yet, and hasn't given out any terrible contracts or anything like that. So we'll see now next year in free agency, because you'll have to do a lot more contracts with the cap, having more cap, and some guys probably moving on. But anyway, so far, I think we've got a guy that might truly oversee a contender for a long time and really change the culture of the franchise. I think he's already done that.
Yeah, I think he's already done that, and I mean he's almost making other franchises change their approach, like the Maple Leafs. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, and just before we go into our last topic of the day, what besides the Tkachuk trade, what would be your favorite move as far as what Zito has done? For me, something that kind of doesn't really we don't really think about or talk about as fans, but it's one of the first things he did when he got to the Panthers. Is that he extended Barkov on that 10-year deal. And I think that's where, like, I think there's a vision, because he could have traded him. He could have maybe just, completely restarted the whole process with the franchise. But he came into a situation where he already had some pieces, and he resigned Barkov, and there was no extension on Hoover, though. There was really nothing else that stood out when he first got here. So besides the Tkachuk trade, what for me would be the Barkov extension. That's one of my favorite things that he's done since he got here. But for you, what's your favorite move besides Tkachuk?
I think for me, I like that, the Tkachuk thing and Barkov too, as you mentioned. I think having that vision of people who can play into their 30s at a high level because of their style of play and their physicality and ability to defend and do other things, which maybe again with Huberdeau might not have been the case because it's more of a finesse skill player, but I'm going to use a very recent thing and that I really really like, and I think it speaks to his ability to have vision is bringing on and then now extending Luosterainen. I think you look at a guy like Luster. I remember you and I talking during the disappointing playoff run a couple, when we won the President's Trophy, how we talked about Luosterainen looking really good. Like he looked like one of our best players in the playoffs. He looked very consistent. He could battle on the boards. He could play two ways. He just stood out. Like Forsling was another guy like that stood out. There was only 2 or 3 bright spots, honestly, that we felt like were consistent throughout those 10 games in the playoffs. And then he came back, had a much better season under Maurice, and the numbers went up. And Maurice has said of him, like, his offensive potential is there. He's only 24, I think. He can probably become a 20-goal scorer. But the guy can kill penalties. I think he could arguably be one of, if not the best penalty killer we got, up there with Barkov and stuff. And I think he can play center. He can play wing. He can play on the second line, third line. He's very responsible. He's a decent, like, really good skater. Has great hands. Still very young. Still developing. Came through the Carolina system, so he's got a good foundation. And to give him this extension for 3 years with $3 million, which with the cap going up, I think is a steal. I think he's incredible. He's one of the most underrated sort of middle six forwards in the league. I think Luosterainen is. And I think even he was noticed this playoffs by other teams that when they looked at Florida, they saw that he is a guy that stood out, and we missed him in the finals, like we really did. So, anyway, to me, it just shows that that's a guy that I kept thinking, like, we got to keep him, and then he gets this signing, and then he signs him for a really good, reasonable contract, and get him right in the middle, as he's probably about to enter his prime. So, anyway, to me, that just speaks to even doing the obvious thing, which a lot of games sometimes don't do, and then we end up frustrated with him. It's like, why didn't you keep that guy? Why didn't you prioritize that guy? What did you overpay for that guy? Like to me, he's gotten the whole Luosterainen thing just right, and I'm excited because I think he's one of my favorite players in the team, and I do think he's going to develop and do a lot more for us. And he's a guy in the playoffs that I trust, against anybody. So anyway, that's one example for me. Like Zito sees the value in that guy and got him for cheap. So that's a move I love.
Yeah, and there's a lot of those. I mean, Verhaeghe, Bennett, but I think with Verhaeghe, Bennett, Reinhardt, it's more of a potential. Like, hey, these guys could become something. That's why their contracts now are so amazing. Maybe Reinhardt not so much, but still for what he contributes, he's getting paid fair. But yeah, like I think Zito's vision is great when it comes to that. So also he also extended Lambert. I remember those 2 years. And for some reason Lambert come to playoffs, man, he's just game. It's just game, man.
He had a career year this season too, on the regular season. He's a guy you trust, and he's played on the third line and played in other lines because he's got speed and a decent shot. So again, just bringing back Mahura, like he just gets those middle, like he just takes care of those moves like really quickly and really quietly. But it's, to my mind, what's going to keep the Panthers competing going forward. And again, sometimes some GMs focus a lot on the big shiny stuff or the trade or the guy who wants to leave, and instead of doing that, he's like, no, I want to keep these guys that are the core, and we're going to need them when we make the playoffs. So yeah, man, it's good stuff.
Yeah. All right, let's transition. We got about 5 minutes left. There's thunder outside the house. We got about 5 minutes left, so let's transition into more of a NHL topic. It's been a lot going on with the Leafs. I already mentioned. I feel like the whole thing's been a mess. I know we've been following what happened with Dubas and that whole thing, but I know this is something you wanted to talk about as far as what's going on around the league. So give us your thoughts on the Leafs and the whole thing that's happening over there.
Yeah, it's kind of low-hanging fruit to talk about the Leafs these days, or any time really, because people get sensitive about it. But I'm fascinated by some of the changes, and I did follow this offseason some of the stuff that happened with Dubas and then the players and the whole Nylander thing that's up in the air in Matthews. But I just briefly want to touch base on the signing of Max Domi and Bertuzzi and Klingberg as well, and even Brian Reeves. Like, it just feels like, I guess from the outside, I'm not a Leafs fan. I'm not rooted against the Leafs except when we really play against them. Obviously, they're in the division, but to me, what I think might be missing, and some people have mentioned it, but I don't think enough has been made of it. It's like they've lost a lot of defensive play in my mind. Like, Bertuzzi is not a good defender at all. And in fact, probably a bad defender. Domi, the same when you look at some of the numbers and some of the way that they play. They're also not physical guys. I think there's this misconception that they're like greedy or like tough guys. Like, I think they're feisty. I think they're like agitators, which you also, you do need on your team, and they may be willing to go to the front of the net, get into it with somebody, but they're not forecheckers. I don't think they're like big hitters, which you also really need in the playoffs, or play that physical style on defense. They take a lot of bad penalties. And Bertuzzi against the Panthers with the Bruins had a hell of a series. But he also turned the puck over, and he also gave away a goal to the Panthers in Game 2 that the Panthers won in Boston. So you're going to take those risks with those guys. Klingberg is sort of a wild card, but he's also not necessarily a great defenseman on his own end. He's more of an offensive player. And Ryan Reeves, to my mind, is unplayable come playoff times. I don't think you can risk him. I mean, he's going to get danced around by anybody. And this idea that he's scary and hit, like, yes, but like Lundberg will fight him, and Lundberg is half his size and probably, go toe-to-toe with him. So all to say that I don't think it's enough has been made of how much defensive ability they've lost with, Archiari leaving, O'Reilly leaving, Luke Shen. And then, Michael Bunting was an agitator for them who was putting up really good numbers too. You're kind of getting that with Bertuzzi and Domi in a way. And they've lost some other depth on the bottom six. So to my mind, I think the Leafs are going to be interesting to watch, because I think there's a risk that their point total goes down actually this season, and that they're not going to be, they're not going to be as potent as people think. I think they'll be less balanced. They're going to be a lot more vulnerable. I think Samsonov is going to have a hell of a season if they want to have a good chance at competing, because if the goaltending with him and Hall isn't really there, they're going to go up. They're going to give up some chances in goals in a lot of games. And the East is stronger now with more depth and with other younger teams coming up. So I don't know. I guess it's my way of saying that, like, I wouldn't be surprised if that turns into a bit of a shit show, to a bit of, with the Leafs and some of these newer guys. He could work out, they could have career years, but I don't think the fans understand. At least, I don't know. They, some fans may not really be taking into account the defensive side, and the fact that these guys are not tough guys. They're like annoying guys, but they're not going to do what the Panthers did to them. They're not going to do that to other teams. Like, they're forechecking. That's not who they are. Miami.
Yeah, no, I think everything you just mentioned, I think what they lost in Ashari, Chen, O'Reilly, they lost some toughness, actual toughness. They just got like really annoying guys, right? They got guys that are gonna frustrate you and maybe rub a glove in your face like Bertuzzi, but I don't know if they got better. I don't think they did. I think that's why they're holding on to the hope that they can keep Nylander at a reasonable salary, and I think you have to resign Matthews. I don't think you can let a player like that go, regardless of what you have to pay him. But yeah, I agree that I think it's a bit more messy than people think it is, and I think the whole thing with Dubas and now Treliving trying to fix or patch things up. I think this actually might be a bit of a transition year for them, and I don't mean in terms of results. I think they're going to get to the playoffs. I think they're going to do well in the first round. I don't know if they'll get past the first round, but I think that's the point, that they're kind of stuck in this limbo of not progressing because maybe they've been scared to change, and they've been, Dubas was very highly focused on the offense and what those guys could do, signing Tavares to what is now a really bad, contract. I get why you do it, but yeah. So, anything else?
Yeah, no, just quickly gonna say also that I know that there are more moves that might come with the Leafs now, but they also are over the cap. So whatever the trades they do, whether even if they trade Nylander and try to get something, or Brody or whoever it is that they trade, whatever they get back, it's gonna have to be cheaper for the cap. So there's only so much talent you can bring back right now, whoever you trade. So again, I think that really limits. Like, I don't envy Treliving like what he's inherited. I think Dubas has a lot to do with that. I think he put him in that position. And in a different episode, we might talk about Dubas. But anyway, it's a transition. I'm just hoping for the franchise and for the fan base, like, they figured that out quickly, that they might need a reset in some ways. They got some obviously core pieces with Matthews and Marner. I think those are keepers. But beyond that, I think they need to move away maybe from some of the moves they've made and just really commit to bringing actual tough guys in some cases, and some periphery. Like, maybe they need a little bit of that Zito magic of, like, can you get, they got Bunting, like Dubas found Bunting as a guy who became a contributor for cheap. Like, can you find 4 or 5 of those guys versus 1 or 2 is what they're probably going to need. Or is Matthews willing to take a discount, which I don't think he is, but we'll see.
Yeah, and if he does take a discount, it's going to be short-term deal. I think he's looking to maximize every contract that he signs, and it's smart to do. I mean, it's a smart thing to do. Some guys like to lock in, like Barkov did, 10 years or 8 years for 10 mil. I think I said it backwards earlier, but some guys, like Matthews, he's gonna look for a 3 to 5 year deal probably, and just trying to maximize the money. And I think just the fact that nothing's come with Nylander and they haven't been able to sign him or trade him, we don't really know what they're looking to do. It's a little messy up there. But
it also speaks to, like, the culture, man. Like, I have to say, like, Matthews is an incredible player, generational player, but he has gaps. Like, he doesn't play on the PK. He doesn't. He has more goals and assists. He doesn't necessarily assist a lot, as much as other, like, first line centers do. He's not a two-way player. I mean, he's solid on defense, but he's not Bergeron. He's not Barkov, and he's making a lot more than those guys. He's going to make a lot more than those guys for the next few years with a new contract. And Tkachuk just signed for 9.5, I think, and that's a 100-point guy who you just proved to you that in the playoffs will score the winning goal, even if it's like, his upper body's like broken, So, like, I don't know, that speaks to also the culture, maybe the place and where they live or where they play. But you do need a little bit of that commitment to, like, not always wanting to get the most money out of every contract and want to win. And there's a ton of examples in the rest of the league about that. So it is interesting in Toronto how some of these guys with Dubas got these contracts, and maybe that kind of skewed the whole thing. But some of those contracts in hindsight, kind of look ridiculous, because there's still some of the top contracts like 5 years after they were signed. You can't win like that. I'm sorry. Like, it's just too much money on 2-3 guys. It's just so hard. Even with us with Bob, we struggle, having that 10 million albatross with Bobrovsky. He played great in the playoffs, but one guy to making that money not performing is hard. Imagine 3-4 guys like that. So anyway, it's hoping for the best, wishing those guys the best up there. But I'm gonna be watching. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps it up for today. We'll be back with another video as soon as we have one for you guys. We also have some things that we're going to be recording in the future. We're going to do a season preview, as well as do some recaps of some of the games and things that are going on around the league, not just with the Florida Panthers. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you around.